Well, welcome to Radio Talks. This is a pilot series of talks about music during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Nathan Moore. I'm the general manager of WTJU 91.1 FM. And I do want to do a little housekeeping, start things off. This is a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar. So do please keep yourself muted. It's not like a webinar where that's forced on you, but I'd like you to stay muted. If you have a question for one of the panelists or a question for the whole group, please go ahead and type that in the chat window. We'll have some time in the second half of this hour to go ahead and answer those questions. And I'll be moderating throughout the whole thing, and so I'll keep an eye on the chat window as we go. Want to give a special shout out to some of the WTJU alums who are attending today's talk. This would have been the kickoff day to a UVA reunions weekend. And it just so happens that today's panelists are all WTJU alums or current DJs, so that's fairly apropos in a sense. I know, though, that it's unfun to have reunions and everything else canceled, which is kind of part of the conversation today, really. So we know everything's been canceled since mid-March, and unfortunately everything about the live music experience is about the worst thing there can be for spreading the novel coronavirus. It's confined spaces, it's large groups of people, there's lots of saliva from singing and otherwise. But what makes this an especially difficult deal is that the music industry was, I feel like, just starting to figure out how to make it so that mid-level artists can make a living in the digital music era. You know, you record and release an album, which probably won't make a pile of money, but then there's a tour on that album and you sell merch and that can make some money, and so you lather, rinse, repeat. We've got people who know a lot more about this than me, but without the touring part of that equation, where does that leave music? We're joined today by an all-star panel of WTJU alums and current DJs who've been part of the music world for years. Rob Sheffield is a columnist at Rolling Stone. Erin O'Hare is the former culture reporter at C-Ville Weekly. Danny Shea handles promotions and production at the Jefferson Theater right here in Charlottesville. Steve Harris is the former owner of Variety Playhouse in Atlanta, and Laura Lyons is project manager for Beggars Group, a group of independent labels that includes 4AD, Matador, and several others. Thank y'all for joining us so much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I want to start with Rob Sheffield from Rolling Stone. You wrote a piece last month, Rob, called "Life Without Live." Take me through the situation as a fan and a consumer of live music. Oh, I got to unmute you. You're on mute, Rob. Let's unmute you first. There you go.
It's so hard to mute me in any other area of my life. Everybody in my life deserves to have access to that button at all times. So you're in a very, very, very lucky position right now. Having live music completely removed from our lives, it's a shock that just keeps going on. Obviously for people who make shows and put on shows. For those of us who think of our lives in terms of what's the next show, what's the latest show, what music I'm going to hear next week, what music I'm going to hear next month, what music I'm going to hear for the rest of the year. It's extremely strange, weird sort of time travel even involved in, the cancellations and postponings. Kraftwerk just postponed their tour. And I was like, wow, I completely forgot I bought tickets to Kraftwerk 3D because one of the group has died since then. It's this weird thing where the time-space continuum and the way that live music fits into it for all of us is just totally derailed, and it's very disorienting.
Yeah. Erin O'Hare, what's your experience been along these lines here in Charlottesville?
It's, like Rob said, it's really disorienting. Usually, in my role as culture reporter for C-Ville, I wrote the local music column, and I would write, local music features. And so I would average 3 or 4 shows a week, and that is not the case. So, it's really strange. It's strange to not have that on the calendar. Like Rob was saying, it's like, you don't have that thing to look forward to. Usually my whole life was based around what shows I was going to when and who I would see and who I was going to talk to. There was this like expectation of what I would hear, but then the surprise element, like discovering a new band that I've never heard before, is gone. So, still listening to records, but like I would say discovering less music because I get a lot from live shows. And in Charlottesville, everything's shut down like everywhere else. So It's a bummer.
So there've been a lot of live streaming concerts, nowhere near as many as, sort of live venues, but uh, production quality is obviously different, and certainly the experience is different. But as music writers, as music critics, Rob, Erin, how do these concerts compare in your experience?
They don't compare to the experience of being in a room full of people and sort of breathing that in and discovering, as Erin said, um, the thing where you show up for a show hoping that you missed the first band or two, and it turns out they show you something, it, just depending on that, depending on seeing the people. I love the live streams. I'm not knocking them at all. I hope a lot of them will continue even after live music returns to our lives. But we all kind of know it's not quite the same thing. Much as we love it for what it is, it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. I admit that I haven't watched that many live streams because something that I really love about going to a show is that you don't just hear the music, you see it being made, you feel it in your body, like you can feel the bass or like a really great riff or, some like weird pedal that somebody's using or like the kick drum. And you don't get that with a live stream. You don't get like the smell of somebody's armpit, which is usually not great, but like it's part of the show. And, or like noticing who's in the crowd or just all of that is gone. And for me, music is such a social thing. I've met most of my friends through music somehow, whether it's at a record store or at a show or through stories I've written. And in a live stream, you can't like, pal around with someone at a show. You can't like share a 6-pack. It's just not the same. So that's why I haven't been watching the live streams, because they make me miss the real thing too much.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I compared it to the end of Goodfellas, where he talks about not being a mobster anymore, and I ordered spaghetti with marinara sauce. I got egg noodles with ketchup. I get to live the rest of my life as a schnook. There's that kind of feeling too. Yeah, it's cool when somebody does the live stream thing. Neil Young's are so great. I hope he keeps doing those forever. Things where he just sits in his backyard with a banjo and just, plays a Rosie in the original song or plays a song from Comes a Time as the sun goes down. I love that. But like Erin said, it's a very social thing. We miss the people that go with that experience.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Well, I want to shift to some of the venue managers on the call here, Steve Harris and Danny Shea. Steve, let's start with you. What's your prediction for when live concerts can come back?
I don't see them coming back this year. At least not on a larger than 100 people or 50 people. The economics, even if you could do it, the economics of trying to do 25% capacity and all the extra costs associated with cleaning and just the steps you have to take, it just doesn't end up making sense. So I think the bigger, at the size shows that I was looking at, we're looking at next spring. And it's, a lot of people feel like until there's a vaccine, it's not going to happen. So the people I know in the business are not optimistic about it anytime soon.
What stands in the way of opening venues at reduced capacity? I mean, say 20% or 30% or intimate shows for 50 people?
I mean, if it's a fully seated show and you can do tables and you can space out the tables, you might be able to do it. But if it's a club show and you've got a pit area or a dance floor area, you can't control people like that. You can't control 6 feet at the bar or at the bathrooms. It's just the venues that have looked at it, it's just not feasible trying to control people like that. And you would just be getting, just trying to put out fires with people getting angry all the time. It just goes against human nature when you go to concerts. So, it can work at a very small, a place like a city winery that can spread out tables and can enforce, masks if you get up from your table. But it's still, unless the ticket prices are in the stratosphere, the economics of it don't make sense. The artists are still going to want to get paid. You still got all your hard expenses. And at 25% occupancy, it doesn't work.
Danny, there was an article that I just saw said that earlier this week that 90% of venues say they could close if this goes on
Yeah,
for
I just
6
saw
months.
that headline. That doesn't sound good at all.
It doesn't. Well, the Jefferson, your organization is one of the venues in the group that released that press release.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think we're just all, it's hard to predict where this is going and how we're getting out of it. There's been an awful lot of speculation. I agree with everything that everybody has said so far. It's just, it's not realistic to think that you could have a good experience, much less one that could actually work on paper. In terms of a rock show, you can't have social distancing at a rock and roll show. You know, it's part of the deal. So, you know, when you talk about like streaming events that are good streaming events, it's usually the ones that play up to the intimacy, and it's the context. It plays into the context of it. If you have a full band, big production, and a stream, it's not really going to play off as well. So whether you have tables, whether it's a seated show, I mean, that will dictate what kind of performance would be effective or enjoyable, much less practical on paper. But, you know, it just seems like every week we're learning more about the virus and learning more about how it spreads and how it doesn't spread. And I'm hesitant to speculate on what it will take to open and when. Nothing in the foreseeable future. There's no reason to think we have confidence that, you know, we had a full spring schedule going into the summer, spent an awful lot of time rescheduling most of those dates, and then went back to reschedule some of those dates, and then have some of them cancel. And then, you know, some of the rescheduled dates have started to pull the plug. What is the safe day to reschedule a show? I don't know. We're getting more and more that are like March of next year is what we're talking about, you know, into October of next year, even November. Yeah. 2021. I mean, it's crazy just, you know, managing a calendar that way.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about the economics of the Jefferson and the Southern right now? I mean, you know, y'all have venues right there basically on the downtown mall.
Yeah, they're in free fall. I mean, there's just nothing we can do. You know, I've been trying to look into ways. There's a lot of goodwill and there's a lot of enthusiasm to do something and have a positive impact, whether it's artists wanting to perform or production engineers that we've leaned on so much. I've been really hesitant to try to push for something where their pay would be compromised, especially under the circumstances. But you need a model. If we're going to use the rooms right now, it would have to be as a stage for streaming, right? I mean, we couldn't do it for performance at all. And how could you do it and like monetize it just enough to cover the minimal costs? And it would be a local regional type of event. So that in itself, it's a really tricky thing. You know, there's a lot of enthusiasm to do that early on, right when the stay-at-home orders were in place. And I felt like it was dangerous. Even if we did have everything else in place, I didn't feel comfortable assembling a group of people in a place to do it. But even now, you know, it's getting easier. This local band, Disco Risque, is playing at the Jefferson tomorrow. And which I'm really happy to do it. The drummer is a sound man that we work with at the Jefferson and Southern. He's a great guy. They're a fun band. But he's running sound himself, and he has his own streaming equipment. It's all, you know, my biggest worry is that we'll get bands coming out of the floodgates wanting to do it too, and we don't really have the infrastructure to support it. So we're trying to engage, you know, socials, sharing streams from local artists and around the country, within Red Light, without, you know, just in general, just trying to reflect being fans of music along with the people that come. But it's difficult, and it's still, I don't really have an answer right now, except we're trying, you know, to come up with ways to utilize the resources we have. And just be a good partner. Part of it is just listening, just, you know, being available to hear ideas too.
Mm-hmm. Danny, I want to bring in the record label perspective and the artist perspective into this. Laura Lyons from Beggars Group, how has this pandemic been affecting you all, the label and the artists?
Yeah, well, I mean, with a lot of the artists that we work with as an independent label, the record cycle is built around the prospect of touring. So generally we'll drop an album and then they'll go on tour either right before or right after. And, you know, that's really important for us and for artists because the sort of news cycle is so short that if you're not touring, then, you know, 3 months after your record comes out, it feels like it's been inactive. So it's really been a struggle to sort of keep momentum up for releases that just came out, especially with bands that do have, you know, a reputation for being a great live band. And that's how people really, you know, discover the band. That's how they bring their friends into it and stuff like that. So it's been a challenge to sort of get creative from a marketing perspective with how we can sort of keep the life cycle of these projects going. So for some artists, you know, the live stream really works, you know, for example, I work with Grimes and she was never going to go on tour anyway. She had, as part of her sort of world building on this record, she had created a digital avatar of herself that was supposed to stand in for her when she was on maternity leave. But that ended up being really, really helpful when it came to the pandemic because, you know, she was prepared with this whole like digital world that could continue to be compelling for fans and keep the narrative going. And, you know, that worked really well. But on the other hand, a band like US Girls, you know, they are this like, I think now it's a 10-person live band. They did this the whole premise of the record was that they recorded it straight to tape, and it's all like analog instruments. And so that's something that, I mean, on the most basic level, they couldn't even be in the same room to do a live stream. But beyond that, it's like, it's just impossible to replicate that experience on a stream. So something we've really been thinking about is, you know, as music fans, we understand that the live stream experience isn't going to like replace or replicate the show experience. So we're looking for ways to create unique experiences that are like, they exist on the internet. And even when we're able to go back to shows, there's still going to be value in having those sort of live stream experiences. So someone I think has done that really well is Arca, who has created, you know, a regular Twitch stream where she's creating music there while fans are talking to her. And sometimes it's a DJ set. Sometimes they're talking about queer theory. Sometimes it's, you know, it's a party. So it's, yeah, we've really been thinking about how to make new experiences instead of trying to replicate something we know we'll never touch. Yeah.
We'll come back more to talk some about the artists. I want to bring in the music writers again here, Rob, Sheffield, Erin O'Hare. I've seen some stories recently that talk about historical quarantines, historical pandemics when artists were all holed up and they just kept on composing, kept on making new art. I think these are meant to give us hope, these stories. What's giving you hope right now?
That's a big question.
I know. Well, you know, tiring of small talk, Nathan moves to big talk.
It's still music. I mean, just the way I'm wired, music is what gives me hope and what I look to. And the responses of artists to this, you know, really horrific set of circumstances and the sort of collective improvisation. You know, a few months ago, nobody knew whether they were just going to wait this out and, you know, release their album a few weeks later, or that they were just going to, you know, there's just so much that we don't know, as Danny said, and we're just kind of figuring out as we go along.
Yeah, I had started researching a story for C-Ville about how local artists were, you know, how creativity was looking for them through the pandemic. Did they feel, you know, like now they have this time that they can explore, And some said, yes, like I feel more creative than I ever have. And others were like, no, I feel completely frozen. I feel like I can't create. And so from what I've heard, and I'm really sad I won't get to write that story, but, you know, it's just different person to person and based on creative process. And now we have, you know, artists, I think, who often, in my opinion, some of the best artists respond to what's happening in their environment, in society. And I think having like the compound thing of COVID-19 and then also the protests against police brutality and the killing of George Floyd, you know, as with any moment like this, I think we'll start to see some really amazing stuff like a few months from now come out of this from various artists for sure, which is exciting, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
So I actually want to, so we can shift into that topic of conversation. It's a big one right now for sure. Also want to just remind everybody who's attending this that if you've got a question, go ahead and paste it in the Zoom group chat. And I'll get to them probably in the second half of this hour. I've got 3 already, a couple that came in before the hour, and then one from Steven. So thank you so far for putting those in. So expanding the conversation out to talk about recent events since the murder of George Floyd and all the protests and demonstrations and rallies against police brutality, you know, everything about this moment feels like we're at a huge societal pivot, but it's just not clear what we're pivoting to. And I'm going to open this one up to anybody who wants to start with it, or I can call on you. What's the role of music and culture work in the music happening right now?
I can start from sort of like the broader industry perspective. So last week, something that started as an industry initiative started by 2 Black women who worked in marketing at Atlantic and another major label, which I forget, started this music industry blackout. The show must be paused. And it was intended as a day for people in the industry to sort of step back and reflect not only on how, you know, music companies could contribute to the movement, but to, you know, reflect a little bit more deeply on sort of how the industry handles, you know, race relations internally. And that's different at every company, of course. But, you know, I think on one level, something that I thought was really interesting was seeing that industry initiative sort of like snowball and get distorted into this broader like Blackout Tuesday, which which was rightfully criticized for not being very effective and in some ways even like counterproductive. But to me, that showed that like the industry does have a really influential platform. And, you know, from everyone I've talked to at other labels, at promoters, you know, across the board, there are internal discussions happening, which are hoping to address sort of like the very segregated nature of the music industry, you know, dividing radio, labels, promoters into urban and pop, you know, stuff like that. And also some more like diversity and inclusion practices So I've been working full time in the music industry for 6 years now, but prior to that, I had to have unpaid internships for 2 years. And, you know, I think that because that's the way to get your foot in the door in the industry, it precludes people from low-income backgrounds, people who can't move to New York or LA for a summer from ever even getting a foot in the door. So hopefully, you know, some reforms are going to come out of this moment of discussion and accountability that, you know, create ways for the industry to become more accessible to Black people, to people of color, and then once they're in the industry, to not be relegated to only dealing with urban music, you know.
I'm going to add to that. What's the role of music and culture work in this moment?
I mean,
what's been it? Go ahead.
No, you
let's
go
take
ahead.
Erin and then Steve. Let's take Erin.
What's been interesting about this is how democratic it's been, that this is really not coming from cultural leaders, but it's coming from the street. It's just a reaction from people. And I think that the musicians in this case are going to be kind of following the feelings that people have of outrage and the change that's in the air. But it's a really organic time, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that translates into music and creativity with it. That it's not some elites sort of dictating this, but it really just bubbled up.
Cultural leaders are individually participating and not necessarily from their platform. You know. Yeah, I mean, it's that is a place of hope right now, that I feel like there is kind of an enlightenment and people just really kind of hitting a collective tipping point where we can really try to make change, you know, and really address things. But there's still a lot of headwinds we have to get through. It's definitely no time to take a victory lap. But I think everyone can look and see how they can personally do a better job making it, you know, addressing this too. And I certainly have been. I mean, the frustration is, it's kind of compounded my frustration not being open, because there's not a whole lot I feel like I can do right now from my job standpoint, you know. I can tweet, but that's gross too. I mean, so I even went there, but there's nothing good coming from Twitter.
Yeah. Erin, you were starting to say something a moment ago.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was.
Just the role of music in the moment.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, I have so many thoughts on that, but like, you know, one thing that I think, you know, a lot of artists would say about their music, you know, that they've told me in interviews, is that music is a way to process all of this and to get your thoughts out to other people, to share them with other people. And so that is something really amazing, and that I'm looking forward to from the music that will come out of this. But then like that also goes back to missing the live show. You know, like a lot of the music that I really love has always been political and very socially conscious and aware. I listen to a lot of punk and a lot of hip hop, and I go to shows like that. And so those are places where, like, you know, people can like rage against the man, or like actually went to a show and bought a tape that's all about how terrible the cops are. And that was like 6-7 months ago. And I would love to go to a show like that right now, where someone's like rolling around on the floor, like screaming into the microphone, just like getting that rage out, and those feelings out. And I wish so badly I could witness that. So I am feeling that void. But and another thing is, like, I write a lot about independent artists and labels. And, you know, I've also seen like a lot of people saying that they're going to make a greater commitment to diversifying the artists on their label. And I just really hope that they stick to those commitments. And, you know, people who book shows saying they're going to book more diverse, you know, lineups. And I really hope that when everything opens up again and when this all gets going again, that they stick to that, because that's something I've been wanting to see for so long. It's frustrating to go to a show and only have like cisgender heterosexual white dudes on the stage the whole night. Like, just doesn't always make for a fun time. So yeah.
Right.
I think on that note, it's also just like creating the space where we have the power to,
For sure.
you know, like you said, I think that when you're talking protest music, when you're talking political or like socially conscious music for the past, you know, few decades, like hip hop has been sort of the driving force in that, and talking about some of the most pressing issues. And, you know, my show at WTJU was on 1 to 3 a.m. And I was happy to be floating in the safe harbor and able to play whatever I wanted. And, you know, I really enjoyed being able to use that time to play hip hop and play rap on my show. But, you know, it's like, can we make space for more shows like that, you know, across the board, wherever we have the power to.
Yeah.
I want to sort of bounce off something Laura said a minute ago. You know, all the research I've read on this kind of thing suggests that, you know, Black folks are typically the first to feel the impacts of an economic downturn. and the last to feel the recovery. We know the music industry is built on the art of many, many Black artists, but the music industry is also seriously suffering economically right now. Laura, you talked about like some possible structural changes that could be made to bring in more young people of color. I mean, how will the music industry decision makers actually do that when there's just no money right now?
I mean, there's money. It's
yeah.
it's like where it's going.
That's a hot take.
It's like, so I've worked at the Beggars Group. We pay our interns. They're part-time employees. At previous jobs that I held, we did not pay our interns, but we would rack up a bar tab of thousands of dollars in a night. So at the end of the day, the money exists. It's a matter of what you're willing to cut down on in order to stand up for your values. And if your values are inclusion and diversity in a real way, then you got to pay your interns if you have enough money for bar tabs.
Let's cut back on other things and prioritize what matters. Yeah.
Same thing, like we're having this discussion about defunding the police. It's all about reapportioning the resources that you have to reflect the values that you want to see in your society or in your industry or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rob, what are you hearing on this? You're with the national publication. What kind of sounds are you hearing from people talking about the Black Lives Matter movement at this time?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. As Danny was saying, it makes it harder to be in the pandemic. While as Danny said, it makes it harder not to be open, not to have the venue as a place for even just face-to-face discussions to take place. It definitely exacerbates that.
Oh.
You're on mute, Nathan.
Sorry, no, I'm not. I want to get to a couple of attendee questions. I need a mute button for myself too, that have come in. And again, if you've got questions for our attendees here today, go ahead and type them in the group chat. I'll get to them where I can. I've got a couple here. Stephen asked just a moment ago, I saw on TV that Garth Brooks is doing a drive-in concert to be shown at drive-in theaters. Is this a realistic model or only for very large draw bands? What do y'all take on that?
I'd say that it's realistic in some circumstances. It just really depends. It's very expensive to put a show on like that. From the research that I've done, and we've definitely been exploring a lot of different ways of presenting a show. The pie would be a lot smaller, and it would have to be, the margins would be even thinner than they are naturally. And, things like concessions, that would be off the table for the most part. And the logistics of bringing in production to, there's an artist with Red Light that just put a show on a couple weeks ago, and they were able to management was able to act as promoter too. And with that, they barely really made it through, but it was a great experience for them and great branding. I don't know, branding's not a right word, but it was good for their identity, for their fans. I think they were able to sell merch and actually did really well selling merch. So it was worth it for them. But like I said, there was not even a promoter really involved. It was the band in their hometown doing it, and management picked up a lot of the logistics a promoter would. So there weren't as many hands in it. So from that standpoint, yeah, I mean, even for Garth Brooks, who knows if it's even like a reasonable business model, what he's doing. He might be doing it as a gift to fans, as a gesture of goodwill, as an experiment. I don't know. I love the idea of bands playing at demolition derbies, at drive-ins under normal circumstances. If you're gonna make it a model for that's all you get, like this is what a show is, I wish there was an answer there, but I don't really see it in most cases.
I think I agree with Danny on that. David Soika did a great bit last week on his show about a Southside Johnny drive-in show, and it was, the $75 a person or $300 a car, and you're listening on your car speakers, and it's just it's a gimmick, and it's probably good marketing, and they get a nice story out of it, but as an experience, it just doesn't feel like you're really part of a concert listening to it in a closed-in car on little car speakers. It just,
I don't think you need a live PA plus the stereo. If you could do both, maybe that would be something.
Yeah. This one was just, listen through your FM radio, and because they were keeping people in the car. You couldn't get out, or if you did, just took away the whole social aspect of it.
Well, I think the Goochland Drive-In is. I think I've heard that they're going to do shows. I haven't heard the details.
Yeah, they're happening. They're happening.
When you go to a drive-in there now, you can get out of the car and just open your. You're still listening through your car stereo, but there's usually enough people around that you don't even really need to. Mm-hmm. But I would think you'd need a live PA plus the stereo. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the expense too. I mean, that's something a drive-in doesn't have naturally. So.
Right. Got another question from Linda Brown, another WTJU alum. She says, I've enjoyed a few live Zoom concerts during the past few weeks, and I'm hoping these will continue even after it's safe. It's less expensive, and in many ways, it's more intimate. Do you think this could be a viable option to in-person performances after it's safe?
I think it's going to be part of it. I think that is going to be part of the model. The idea of Zoom church, it's like, why wouldn't they just continue to do that for people in a congregation that can't really make it to church but want to be part of it? Why wouldn't they just do that all the time now, right? So I've thought about that with shows in general, but I think that it will take a lot of the spontaneity and danger out of shows if all shows are streamable. I think there are a lot of shows that if it doesn't, it has to happen in that room. We're already having a problem with people staring at their phone or taking pictures and not living in the moment. So I think that there's a danger in that, but I do think streaming is going to be a much bigger part of the equation, especially if we're opening at partial capacity. Part of making up the difference could very well be selling access through streaming.
Erin, were you about to say something there, or just
Sorry,
nodding?
did I cut you off?
I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know that it works well for every genre. I think streaming is better suited to certain types of music. And I'm just sitting here thinking about the shows that I usually go to, and I'm like, that's not gonna work on a stream. And I'm just, clearly I'm not excited about the streams. That's all.
Well, one more question that did come in on the streams from Holly Gardner says, I work for a nonprofit presenter of classical music. When live concerts are not possible, what are ways for musicians and presenters to sell tickets, that is, charge for their performances when so much content is available online for free? I've seen a handful, very small number of performances with a charge or with a fee on them, but really not very many. So what do y'all think?
I think that there are definitely companies working on proprietary software to sell tickets to live streams. I know of several that are already sort of in the works. So I think the idea is that some company is going to figure out a way that makes it easy to put these on and sell tickets and sort of and it's up to the artist to make that experience worth whatever they're charging.
Zoom is getting a lot of money these days to invest, for sure.
Yeah, who's got stock?
A lot of the acts, Facebook or YouTube Live allow them to put a tip jar out. I mean, they're doing that on the front porch shows. I haven't seen numbers as to what's coming in with that, but people have been very generous.
Yeah,
it seems, in the last few months. So it's a model. It's hard to predict that, and it's hard to bank that people are going to pay what a normal concert ticket would.
Right.
But it's something.
People inherently have a shorter attention span with gadgets in general too, So if you've committed to a concert and you're there, you're gonna, be more invested in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're watching this panel right now, you're probably on a screen where you've also got your email and social media, and you're distracted doing, maybe making dinner here in a minute. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's you're right. You're not in the moment in the same way with the person-to-person connection to the music happening. And some of these small venues too. I think it's just going to be so like WTJU runs a real small venue on our first floor. It's just a little place with maybe 30-35 seats during the before times. Maybe if UVA lets us, we'll be able to open that up to some kind of like just solo act or duo that are part of the same germ pod with no audience. But there's really no way to bring it back to a live performance. I mean, there's just no way to distance there. It's not that big of a room. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on. Oh, here's another question that came in that I'll kind of pitch to the group. Anybody worry that in a year, most new music is going to be almost exclusively about quarantine, the pandemic, or Black Lives Matter? It seems the current situation is restricting the life experiences that inspire artists to create. Well,
I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, people always come up with stuff to write about and create art about.
People are self-centered, like in general. So, I mean, and then like I was with C-Ville Weekly over the course of like August 11th and 12th, 2017. So like the Unite the Right rally. And like, I was really thinking that pretty much everything anyone was going to write ever again in Charlottesville was going to be about Unite the Right. And that wasn't the case at all. A few people did. Some people did it tastefully and powerfully, and others did it in extremely poor taste. And I had to be like, no, I'm not writing about this. Please do not send me more of these videos with this horrible footage that you should have warned me about, like that sort of thing. So I don't know. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think artists, they do respond to the world around them, but there's always going to be other things that they're exploring for sure. And I just, I think people are also looking for other things to think about and feel about right now. So I'm sure there's going to be stuff that's like the anti-quarantine or the, that plenty of other stuff to talk about as well.
Most
our state. Go ahead.
Most artists that I work with explicitly like don't want to do interviews about the quarantine anymore, and like are sort of, they don't want their work to be seen as like explicitly tied to the quarantine. And so many of them take like 4 years to write an album anyway. So
yeah. Yep.
Station alum, WTJU alum, Erin Margosis reminds us that people can always write about their effed up childhoods. So there's that. But I wanted to kind of parlay that. I mean, what do you see as the role of music sort of now and going forward between kind of an escape from the hard shit that's happening right now versus kind of like speaking to it, reflecting it back to ourselves and working for sort of a better world?
That's what it's always been, right?
Connective tissue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Erin said that she hasn't really discovered a lot of new music in this time, and I kind of tend to agree that I've been listening to more older music. I've caught myself doing it. I will say that the Run the Jewels record last week was like a breath of fresh air. It felt so good to listen to that loud, and it felt highly appropriate. So, I don't know. It does speak to the times directly, which any of the records would have anyway, in a sense.
Yeah, like I think that's just often been, like we've been talking about, artists have always written about these sorts of things. And, like I guess I'm not discovering a ton of new music, but I'm still buying records like crazy. I mean, I'm always getting a mail order thing, there's always something from the past that's relevant to now. Like there are a couple records I've really been looking forward to that are coming out soon that I know will address some of the things that are going on already, just because these things have always been, or they've been problems for a long time. They're just more in the more mass consciousness right now, maybe you could say.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of front burners right now.
Yeah.
Rob, you want anything here? We've heard from most of the rest on this question, that sort of balance of the escape from the hard stuff, and then also reflecting that hard stuff back and coming up with a new vision. How do you see that balance, and what's
Go back to what Danny said a minute ago. It's been such an astoundingly great year for new music, and it's very very difficult not to be talking about this music in rooms with other people, which is one of the ways that music is meant to be processed. So we're sort of looking for ways to nourish the listening experience outside of that. The Fiona Apple album is just an absurdly extreme, historically extreme example of an album that, in terms of people I know who are crazy about music, people were so hungry for that album. People consumed it so greedily. We all wanted to talk about it. We all wanted to stay up all night in a bar talking about it loudly and obnoxiously and increasingly incoherently. to be texting about it, great, but I cannot help but look forward to the day when we can have those arguments about that Fiona Apple record, a record made to be argued about late into the night. It's almost like she gave us this album as a sort of time release, gift, that it was something we could look forward to. When the battle is over, we will wear a crown. The Run the Jewels album is the same way. I don't want to be reading people's tweets about this record. I want to be arguing about it with people face to face, friends, strangers, enemies. It's that kind of record. And something about 2020, it couldn't have been planned in advance because nobody knew how bad the quarantine was going to be, but just an astoundingly great year for music. And I think that's part of how we're going to be processing this event moving forward.
That'll be the silver lining.
Absolutely. Or not even the silver lining, but it'll be like, this was what we were clinging to, that hanging on, like that. The Fiona Apple album, it seems like she sings as though she saw the whole thing coming, and she knew that people would need this record. The Run the Jewels record, very much a record made for people who would need it, very much in the moment, as we all do at the moment. This is something really beautiful and inspiring that music can do. The upcoming Bob Dylan record, very much the same way. When he released Murder Most Foul, he said, this is something we recorded a while ago, and we just thought, people could use it right now. It's like, how long exactly have you been sitting on this 17-minute song about the Kennedy assassination, Bob? You just had it in your bottom drawer, and you thought, oh, people are bored right now. I'll just throw this out there. Because we are all consuming music maybe a little more desperately, a little more fervently, definitely a little more needily than usual. Something about the way people are responding to music is
Renaissance of it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The Apple album feels like it came out a year ago now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a couple more questions I want to get to before our hour's up. A quick one here that was sort of directed at WTJU specifically. This is from Margaret in New Orleans. Thinking about that small venue on our first floor, do we already present artists or groups there in a live stream? We certainly did in the before times. We are part of the University of Virginia, which has taken an extra cautious approach to opening university facilities, and so we're abiding by that for all the right reasons to do so. The Front Porch is an independent nonprofit downtown. They've been having live stream music, either solo or duo artists that we've been airing on tape delay on WTJU's airwaves. We are looking at reopening just for artists only, but no audience. Again, kind of the same model, that solo or duo format on our little stage, which would certainly be safe, but it's and sensible, but we just have to get approval to do so, and it's not guaranteed. So the other question, though, that I wanted to ask you all, coming in from our chat board here, looking down the road a year or two, any thoughts on what the landscape is going to look like for smaller or newer acts that are wanting to put together a tour, given the high likelihood that many small venues won't be reopening at all or not in a position to take risks on unknown acts?
Who knows? 2 years from now, who knows? I mean, I don't know if, I think there'll be stages 2 years from now, whether they're the same ones that we're used to now. It's never been like that stable anyway. You know, clubs kind of come and go. I feel like there'll be opportunities. What Laura was saying earlier too, I thought was poignant in that so many bands, there's so many artists that were having their moment right now and had the rug pulled out from under them. And you don't know if they'll ever get it again. Like if people will care once we can come back. And yet maybe it will open up opportunities for other people too. You just don't know. It's cruel and unfair, and there's just not a whole lot we can do about it. But I think that, you know, speaking from a small club, if we can fill a night and not be a loss, that's a win, really. We're constantly trying to plug in the calendar. So, you know, if it was an artist that we couldn't really bank on now, I don't think that would change much, you know, 2 years from now or a year from now or whatever. Hopefully the audience is out there and they can afford to go out too. I mean, that's a big concern as well, is what patrons are willing to do when we come back and how much expendable income they have. You know, we were thinking before that the fall was going to be crazy, like doubled up with acts. And I mean, that's not looking reasonable now, but whenever we can come back, you would think a lot of people are going to try to make up for lost time. And you just don't know what appetite the consumer is going to have with that.
Steve ran a video. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I think the small shows will come back, but the idea of people going to festivals, I think that's going to take a long time before they're comfortable. And, you know, every time there's a gathering and then there's a little bump in infections, people are going to get freaked out again. So it's going to be a slow climb back. And I think a lot of acts that were club acts that, you know, cover bands or groups that just routinely play a couple times a year that aren't must see, don't have a hot new record, it's going to be tough. You know, just the touring acts that make their bread and butter, people are going to really think twice, and it's not going to be, you know, it's Saturday night, I have to go see live music for a while.
Ready to host your new favorite up and coming indie bands in your basement, because you have to come back and save us all.
Yeah. DIY venues, they've always kind of had that attitude, you know, it's like you just can't expect to make a ton of money, but, you know, people have shows in their living rooms or in their basements because they love music so much that they just have to do it. And so I think that, you know, that scene has always kind of existed outside of that, like that economic structure of, you know, like the music business per se. So I imagine that once it's a little safer, that will of course pick up again.
Mm-hmm. And Matthew Simon, one of our current WTJU DJs and also staff over at the Paramount here in Charlottesville, just shot me a message. Also, maybe smaller acts will have a chance to play bigger venues, but with a limited capacity. So, hey, who knows? All right, the last question on this hour of ours, I want to basically do the whole panel and start with the question that was on our opening slide. Where does music go from here? Steve, why don't you start us?
I'm not optimistic in the short term anyway. I mean, I think that there's a lot of artists who are doing really creative things, and I'm seeing a lot of things, online collaborations that are amazing, or really intimate performances that are working really well. But in terms of, you know, the social experience and live music, I'm pessimistic about it. I think it's going to take a long, long time for it to come back.
Danny, how about you?
I agree. I mean, like I said, I don't know. I think all bets are off in large part. You know, we just don't really know how it's going to come back, what the complexion is going to be, what precautions we're going to have to take, what measures we're going to have to take. Rubbing alcohol misters, hazmat
Biosuits.
Yeah.
Everybody gets isopropanol poisoning.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, we don't know what what the news is going to say next week too. It's so hard to tell. Yeah. It's just a matter of what shape are we going to be in at the point when we do feel like we can do something again. Will it be us or will it be somebody else? I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And at the same time, I think that everybody's trying to do something. And I think there will be some positive things to come from that there will be more innovations from it that hopefully will kind of, make things better once we are in a healthier place too. So I think we just have to keep encouraging what we can and keep our ears open and keep kind of thinking about how we get through it.
All right. Well, our conversation so far has covered, where music goes on art and creativity side, the economics of it, and the even social justice angle of it. Laura, where do you see music going?
I mean, in the immediate future, I think that, music is always going to have such a powerful place, like in all of our lives. It's up to us to sort of like sustain it with creativity and with compassion. So like, if you're behind the scenes in any way, like we just have to get creative in the ways that we support our artists and get them out there. And if you are a fan of music, you think about taking that next step and buying a record instead of streaming it, or buying some merch, anytime that you want to support. It's just finding ways to support artists more directly if you have the ability to.
Cool. Erin, you're up. Where do you see music headed next?
I don't know. I mean, I'm excited to see where it goes next. I would definitely echo Laura's, pitch to like buy music from artists. Like that's so important right now. They're losing so much money from touring, and who knows when they can even have band practice again to like make new stuff, right? Like that's another thing. And I guess like that this is kind of a hard question for me to think about because my life writing about music is changing as well. So it just all feels very up in the air. But yeah, I'm just excited to see where it goes. I'm sure it'll materialize into something that we can all hold on to and get something from still.
All right, Rob Sheffield, we're going to close with you. Where's music going next?
Oh, wherever we're going next, music is going to be part of it. I love what Danny said about connective tissue, and I feel like as music fans, music listeners, music consumers, I hope to God, music purchasers, it's a time for us to rise up and be the connective tissue that keeps this music, that keeps it alive, that keeps the passion, enthusiasm, and word of mouth alive. People mentioning like what a heartbreaking thing it is for artists for whom this was their moment. Like think about the Waxahachie record that came out that should have been what we're all talking about, like this summer. So many artists who really like were ready to take their music to people face to face. And that's something that we as a worldwide community of music fans, music listeners, we have to improvise solutions to. In terms of purchasing, the example of Bandcamp has been super inspiring. The way that Bandcamp has adjusted its Fridays, where it waives its piece of the retail price. But people are looking for creative solutions to keep music alive during what's just really a terrifying time.
All right, thank you all for your last words on that, and I think my experience with being around humans is that music is part of who we are, part of where we go, no matter what. But the business of music is a whole different thing, and I think I share y'all's fears and concerns, not just because WTG relies on the art and creativity of so many amazing musicians, but also because I hurt for those who are hurting, But I want to thank our panelists so much, and thank you all also for joining us, all those who came in attendance. Quick plug for WTJU, for those of you who are haven't been in touch with the station for a while, we are on the air at 91.1 FM in Charlottesville, online at WTJU.net, where we also have show archives and past playlists. Thank you all for coming out to be a part of this today. And thanks so much to Rob Sheffield, columnist at Rolling Stone, Erin O'Hare, former culture reporter at C-Ville Weekly, Danny Shea doing promotions and production at the Jefferson Theater when it's open, Steve Harris, the former owner of Variety Playhouse in Atlanta, and Laura Lyons, project manager for Beggars Group. Y'all are awesome. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for
everybody.
having us.
Y'all.
Have a good weekend and listen to lots of radio. And we'll talk with you soon on the dial.
Thanks, Nathan.
Bye.
Bye.